1. My story actually happened about 10 years ago, but it's still something that I think about to this day, and it still gives me the chills. Anyway, let me give you a bit of background information. At the time that this situation occurred, I was 9 years old. My sister, who was around 6, my brother, who was no more than 4 months old, and I were going to get some food with my dad. My mom has stayed home. I do not recall why exactly, but I really wish she hadn't. We drove to a Church's Chicken to pick up something to eat for dinner. This specific Church's Chicken location also doubles as a gas station. Basically, if you walk into the Church's Chicken, it expands to the right into a gas station, like a Circle K, and vice versa. As one really long room, sort of. So my dad decided to leave his 3 children in the back seat of the car, while he ran inside to grab the food. I know that's probably not the most responsible thing in the world, but in his mind, we were okay because he parked right in front of the store window, and the weather outside was pretty good. So we wouldn't be sweating or anything in the car. Not smart, but I suppose at the time he didn't really think it all the way through. But I digress. We all sat in the back seat of the car, me on the left, my sister on the right, and my brother in the middle in his portable car seat. You know, the ones that face the back of the car and such. We were sitting in the car for about a minute, when suddenly, I looked up and saw a man just staring right at me. He was tall and lanky, with tattoos on his thin arms. He looked almost homeless, with random tufts of greasy hair on his head, and his jaw forming some sort of wannabe beard. He was wearing a greasy grey muscle shirt, which looked like he hadn't taken it off in months, and really faded jeans, which also looked like he'd been wearing them non-stop for months. He was just standing there, looking right into the car, right at me, and when our eyes met, he gave me the creepiest smile I had ever seen in my entire life. If you looked into a mirror, opened your eyes super wide, and just bared your teeth, you'd see exactly the same smile that he gave me. I remember that he walked over and chained his bike to a random post on the sidewalk, right outside the Church's, all while looking at me. I was super creeped out and scared, as any 9-year-old girl would be at this point. After chaining up his bike, I watched him walk into the store, and I could still see him from the window, but there was one problem. I couldn't see my dad. I leaned over in the car trying to look for him through the window, but I couldn't see anything. Except the man, who was now standing in line at the gas station side of the store. I decided that it would be a lot safer to get out of the car and go inside the store where more people were. So that's what I decided to do. I turned to my sister and I said, "I have to go use the bathroom. Let's get out and go find Dad." I didn't tell her the real reason, as I didn't want to freak out a 6-year-old. I got out of the car as fast as I could, and then I realized this was going to be a lot harder than I thought. How was I going to pick up a portable baby carrier with a 4-month-old baby inside and carry it all the way into the store? I decided it was better to try than to stay in the car, because I really thought that man was going to come back and try to get into the car or something, which wouldn't have been hard as it was a very old car. I somehow managed to pick up the carrier with my baby brother inside, probably from the adrenaline, and we began walking into the store. I kept my eye on the man, and when he saw that we were out of the car, he quickly took his things and began making his way outside, staring right at us. I started thinking the worst, and I was on the verge of tears when suddenly I heard my dad ask, "What are you doing?" I looked up, and I saw him standing there, looking at me quizzically. I lied and said something like, "The baby was crying, and we were coming to find you," because for some reason I didn't want to tell him what had actually happened. My dad took the baby carrier away from me, and we all go back to the car. Just as we were driving off, however, I looked over and saw the man looking at me again, giving me that same nasty grin. He got on his bike and began following us out of the parking lot. I got even more frightened, as our house was about a 1/4 mile from this place, and he could easily follow us there. I was about to tell my dad about the man when I looked over and saw a car driving into the parking lot to his right. But because the man on his bike was not paying attention, he drove right into the car's path, colliding with it and flying off his bike. I suppose it was karma if he was intending on doing something bad. Which I assume he was, because no more than 2 weeks later, when my parents were watching the local news, a man had been arrested for kidnapping and raping an 8-year-old girl. When I looked up at the television screen, there was that same exact man from the church's chicken parking lot. So creepy, homeless-looking man with this scary grin. I hope you rot in prison, and let's never meet again. 2. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett, and Kyle. We do this every year, kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go on our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there like we usually do at the same spot. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Our second day was basically all the same thing, hiking, food, one too many beers, but this night ended up being not so perfect. I remember watching a Mr. Nightmare video about some guys camping and they heard laughing and it turned out it was nobody in their group. Yeah, my story is similar. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other like guys do, when John stopped messing around and froze. Everyone was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel, but he said no. It was most definitely not. He was scaring me at this point, so I decided to resume the tackling session, and I took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put out the fire and headed into the tent. We had a 6-person tent, for anybody wondering, so we were all in one tent. Just as our only light source, besides our flashlights, went out, I heard a slight cackle. I assumed it was one of the boys because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything is funny. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight directly onto Bennett's face. I thought he was the one laughing. Bennett's face was as white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing." And Kyle said, "That wasn't you?" We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection we had. I was on the very end of the tent with Kyle and John in the middle, and Bennett on the other end. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughing. We weren't exactly at an actual campsite, where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot, and set up camp there. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal, so I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac running around. I got tired, so I dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard laughing again. It's hard to describe other than it sounded menacing. I was frozen. I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my buddies were awake. The axe was under my pillow. As I mustered up the strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, just circling around the tent. Someone was definitely outside, walking around our tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of the tent where the entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person ferociously shook the tent and screamed, "Boogity boogity!" That's when I knew my buddies were awake as well, because Kyle screamed like a little girl, and after he screamed, whoever was behind the tent laughed again and walked off. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and definitely sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but make sure to go to a legit camping site. I now bring a judge, gun, with me, and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have been a deranged homeless person, psychopath killer, meth head, or just an asshole playing a prank on us. But I sure as hell won't camp in a rural place anymore. Stay safe out there. It's a dangerous world we live in. 3. This incident took place back in 2008. I was about halfway through my first year of college and decided that pledging a fraternity would be a good way to meet new people. Turns out I was right. The kids I met during this time are still my best friends today, and actually stood in my wedding. But this story isn't about them. It is about an alumni that frequented many of our closed initiations during pledging, and lived in the college town since graduating 4 years earlier. As a little background, I grew up in small private schools, graduating class of 18, and had very few friends throughout high school. In general, I was and still am rather shy. I was raised to give people the benefit of the doubt, trust people until they give you a reason not to, never underestimate the kindness of strangers, etc. Basically, I have been taken advantage of from time to time because I am overly trusting of others. Now, pledging is different at every college and university, and there are different thresholds of what you can and can't get away with. Going to a small school and not being a national chapter, we were able to do just about anything we wanted. I don't necessarily condone a lot of it, and I was fortunate to pledge a fraternity that cared more about bringing the people closer together than making them puke from doing sit-ups and beer bongs. The night of which this story takes place was one of the more mentally challenging nights. We were blindfolded at 4 p.m. and made to stand in a small room in our fraternity house for hours with a particularly unpleasant song playing on a loop, and offset multiple times by multiple speakers. One by one we would get pulled out of the group and grilled for about a half hour, and sent back to wallow in shame for not knowing things like the middle name of a fraternity member who graduated in 1986. A little ridiculous looking back on it, but it was really important back then, and it really brought us together, as silly as that sounds. I was one of the last to go and finished around 2:30 a.m. Before the night began, I had told my pledge master that I needed to leave before the night was over because I was volunteering for a charity event early the next morning. As this was taking place in the basement of a small, dingy fraternity house, I was being led back up the stairs from where I came. But instead of being led back to my group, I was pulled in a direction that led outside, as I could tell from the cold night air. I still have my blindfold on, and I'm waiting for something to happen, when my pledge master rips it off me and continues the verbal dismantling. Standing behind him is one of the other assistant pledge masters, and an alumni who I only know as Dave. As I mentioned, Dave graduated a few years before, about 25 or 26 years old, and never really left the area to find work. He showed up back at the fraternity house during events like this one I am describing, and had an uneasy way of overstaying his welcome. Outside of this, I really did not know him and had no reason to cast him in a negative light for being awkward at times and not wanting to give up on his glory days. Once my pledge master ran out of things to berate me for, he told me to get going so I could get some sleep before my volunteering. As the event was still going on in the house, the pledge master and assistant pledge master returned to the house, and I was left to stand outside with Dave, feeling pretty low.
Hey man, try not to worry about it too much. Everyone has trouble with these nights,
Dave said. I told him I wasn't too beaten up by it, and I understand most of it is for show.
So what's this thing you got going on tomorrow?
Dave asked, trying to move on from the night. Oh, nothing crazy. Just a school-sponsored charity event. My mom has the disease, so it's been something I've done for years. I told him, thinking he was just trying to make small talk.
It's taking place right next to the activity center on the west side of campus, right? I live right across the street,
Dave says. This is where my ignorance and trusting behavior got me into trouble.
You only have a couple hours until it starts. Why don't you just crash at my place, and I'll wake you up when you need to go?
Dave insists while motioning to his car at the end of the driveway. Now in my mind, my pledge master knows this guy, trusts this guy at our very private events, and trusts him enough to leave me with him. Why the heck shouldn't he? We are all fraternity brothers, and part of that bond is helping one another in times of need. Or at least that's what I'm thinking. I hesitantly agree for two reasons. My apartment was about a 25-minute walk away, and he had a car. The activity center was about another 15 minutes walk away from my apartment. This would save me a lot of time and energy after a pretty tiring night. He begins leading me to his car, making small talk about what he experienced during pledging, and how it's not easy on anyone. After a short 5-minute car ride, we pull up to a small ranch house that is literally across the street from the activity center. He wasn't lying. This is working out great. And I even have time to get some shut-eye. Again, in my mind, this dude is looking out for a future bro and just being nice to someone in need. See how trusting I am of strangers? He opens his front door, and it is incredibly dark. We walk into his family living room, and I notice he only has a couple of lazy boy type chairs in front of an old box TV. Okay, I guess I'm not sleeping on a couch. He continues to lead me through the living area, past the small kitchen, and mentions that this is a 2-bedroom house so I can sleep in the guest. Perfect. We get to the room and he slowly opens the door and flips on the light. As I walk around him and begin to enter the room, I see something that makes me question what I just got myself into. On the small twin bed in the middle of the room are a small pair of shorts and a small t-shirt, laid out like you would for a child getting dressed in the morning. They were old high school wrestling gym clothes, clearly worn and neatly displayed on the bed.
I got some clothes laid out for you to wear so you can get out of your pledging stuff,
he says without skipping a beat. It had a tone that made it sound like it was meant to cover up the uncomfortable situation, but was made as more of a demand than an offer. I said, "Sure thing," and closed the door behind me. Of course there is no lock, because why would there be in a creepy house with a creepy guy who wants me to wear his old clothes that are way too small for me? For about 2 to 3 minutes, I just stand there staring at the clothes thinking, why would these already be out if he didn't know I, or anyone, was going to be needing a place to sleep? Why was he still at the pledging event when no other alumni stayed past midnight and opted for the bars instead? Just as I am slowly beginning to freak out, I realize I have my phone on me again. During pledging, we have to hand in our phones, and during this time, I rarely had it on me. I powered it back up, and before the screen is even warmed up, bzz, 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 bzz. I have about 10 text messages from my pledge master, both assistant pledge masters and some of my fraternity members, along with a few missed calls peppered in. In chronological order, as best as I can remember. Hey, where are you? Did you already leave? Pledge master. Did you leave with Dave? Assistant pledge master 1. You're not with Dave, are you? Assistant pledge master 2. Text me or call me ASAP, pledge master. If you're with Dave, you need to get the fuck out of there, pledge master. So here I am, in a man's guest bedroom, staring at his old childhood clothes he wants me to wear, behind a door that doesn't lock, with my phone blowing up with people telling me to get away from this guy who I willingly let take me to his house. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting for my heart to stop pounding and figure out my next move. I don't know if it was the smartest or best move, but I decided to exit as quickly and nonchalantly as possible. Opening the door, I would have to walk past the kitchen and family room to get to the front. What I noticed was, again, there was no light on in the house, not even coming from the other bedroom where I would have assumed he would be. I began walking past the kitchen when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. I think I startled him as much as he startled me. He was leaning up against the refrigerator that was facing away from the hallway I was walking down. He didn't have anything in his hands that would make sense to be in the kitchen, and didn't look like he was doing anything other than waiting in that spot. Before he could get a word out, I flipped my phone open. Yes, a flip phone, it was 2008. And in stride said, "You know what? I forgot. I need some paperwork for tomorrow morning that is still at my apartment. I appreciate your help, though. And power walked/jogged out of the house. It all happened so quickly I don't think I even gave him a chance to react after initially alarming him. In the next 4 years, I never saw him return to the fraternity house or any function. However, this isn't to say we didn't hear from him again. It turns out he is more unstable than I initially thought, and was arrested multiple times for cornering women in public and exposing himself. After my incident with him, I was told numerous stories from other fraternity members that alluded to him being predatory by nature. Never with a younger fraternity member, but has enough of a history that he had eyes kept on him at all times when he was around fraternity functions. I still like to believe people are genuinely good in this world, and I have no problem underestimating the kindness of strangers. But because of this little life lesson, I am much more critical in these situations. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 252. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm sorry to be a bother about this, but if you could please share the video with anyone you think might like it, and it helps get the word out and hopefully will help offset the issue of YouTube not notifying people that videos are up. Yeah, it seems to be a growing problem. Views for average videos are, well, they're about half of what they should be in a day for me right now, and that's a problem. Okay, not going to keep complaining about it, but if you have shared the videos, thank you, and if you could do so, then it would be appreciated. Oh, before we go, I just want to say that if you've sent me a message, an email, or something like that, I'm not ignoring you. It's just I'm way behind on correspondence, and I will try in the next week or two to get caught up on that. So thank you for your patience in that regard, and I will try and get on top of it as soon as I can. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.